Good morning, everybody. We are joined today by Gavin Weale, and I'm sure everybody knows Gavin. He's been with the Amapico and further family since the get-go, really. I think since the sort of inception. So he's very well acquainted with the program and with many of you as a coach and a mentor. Gavin came to South Africa some years ago now. He was working for Liberty UK and landed some funding to replicate the model that they were doing around a sort of a youth-centered magazine called Live. And the Shuttleworth Foundation funded Gavin to come to South Africa and to employ the model here, which he did, and that was in Cape Town. He then later on moved the business to Johannesburg and really scaled it from something that was a print publication, moving it online, and then really evolving and refining the business and the business model to Digify, which really centered around digital skills training, and he scaled to Kenya and Nigeria as well. So he is a well-versed social entrepreneur. Gavin and I had the honor of working with Gavin in the days of Liberty at the Bloemfontein office. And he's been through it all, the highs, the lows, the uglies, the messies, and the victories, of which there have been many. But he'll be the first to tell you that it's a windy road, and a lot of his success has really been based on his grit, determination, resilience, a really amazing team, many of whom are still with him today, and growing the business and scaling and doing all the good things. But also Gavin will be the first one to tell you it's about your pipeline. And which is why we've asked him to come and share some of his insider tricks and really just share a little bit of the things he's learned along the way, along his journey. Gavin is also a writer. He's a dad. He has a little one, which we were talking about earlier on Sky. So he's also a family man who's got to try and balance it all, also balance a team of people who are now working remotely. So that is Gavin for you. Thank you so much for joining us, Gavin, and for putting your presentation together. I'm sure it's going to prove super useful to our current cohort as well as our alumni who join us here today. And I think it'll also not only help focus the guys, but really give them some ways forward during this somewhat challenging time. So thank you, Gavin.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Linz. That was a really comprehensive introduction. I don't think better than I can do for myself.
Pleasure.
Thanks for having me, and it's nice to see you all and all the familiar faces. I'm also a bit surprised to see some of the SEs that I coach and mentor or have coached and mentored, because I thought I'd gone on about pipelines so much they'd just roll their eyes if it was mentioned again. But yeah, it is, as you'll see from this presentation, something I've thought about a lot and I've had to learn to keep my business going and growing. So I'm going to take you through just something I put together for this, which is trying to summarize the key things I feel like have worked for me in generating revenue in my business. And we refer to it at Digify as business development. And the pipeline we refer to is essentially the kind of list of opportunities you've got of money coming into your business in any shape or form. But I think you guys know what my business does. And so, you know, one thing to note, I think, about all of this is that it's very much from the perspective of a business which is more about services than product. You know, we're not we're not so focused on, you know, selling products and that kind of revenue generation, but also one that has been largely dependent on funding, from, you know, big international funders to local foundations, CSI, etc. So what I'm going to go through really comes from that perspective. You know, I wouldn't profess to be an expert in terms of product sales, but hopefully the principles of this, which are very much about developing opportunities, should apply to anyone's business. So I want to start though with a bit of a question for you guys, because in a way what we're really talking about, unfortunately, is sales, which can be a bit of a dirty word, in that many of us are not keen on sales, or you know, find it very scary. So I just wanted to ask, throw it out to whoever wants to contribute. What goes through your mind when you think about doing sales? What emotions and thoughts and feelings?
Growth.
Growth.
Money, 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 money.
Thanks, Portia. What else?
Sales people.
Hey?
Sales people.
Salespeople. You think of salespeople?
Yeah.
And what are salespeople like?
Desperate.
Pardon?
Desperate.
So you think of people like phoning you, cold calling you, trying to persuade you to stay on the phone. Yeah, it sounds desperate, doesn't it? Anyone else?
I think it's expressing your passion, like what you're passionate about, but like trying to, of course, lure someone into it, you know, and why they should buy into it.
That's great.
It's a bit challenging if you're not passionate, but if you are, then it's a lot more easier.
Absolutely. And probably the desperation that Ian talks about comes from people selling something they couldn't give a hoot about, but they just need the money.
You know, also coming from a sales background, from insurance, the method of how they would use us to, you know, employ us to sell their product. It also puts your values of your company in place, the integrity and the honesty and all of those things. That will make sure that your salespeople don't do things to jeopardize your company.
Sure. Thanks, Portia. Anyone else? How you feel about sales? Does it fill anyone with dread?
I feel it's a bit it's a stressful process, and you have to engage people. It's not everyone's strong point, so
yeah,
it's a bit stressful and hectic. Hi, Gavin.
It is, and I think that we all feel like that, you know, and many people do feel that way about that.
I think in another way, it's when girls become like boys, when they have to face rejection. So you have to be prepared for that, you know. It's like you have to be open for that and not take it personal.
Great point. Yeah, I mean, that may be one of the reasons why we fear it so much, is because you could walk into a room and basically someone tell you, I don't like your product, or I don't like what you do. I'm going to reject you. You're facing rejection every single time, which is tough. Last couple of comments. Anyone else?
I have a question to ask. I hate commission-based sales. Like, you know, putting commission out there. I mean, a lot of people would thrive on commission, but completely hate it. Hate it. I feel that a salesperson will do better if they know they're going to go home every day or every month with a set amount of a set salary. So that will drive them, you know, maybe have incentives, but commission, definitely not.
Sure. Well, in this presentation, I think we'll focus more about the idea of doing sales as a leader of a company, which all of you guys are, you know, rather than working in sales. But I just wanted to start with that question because, you know, there is this perception of sales as as kind of how Ian put it, you know, these sort of desperate people cold calling and trying to persuade someone to buy something, and it can feel a bit pathetic. And if you're not that kind of person, or you're not really confident, or you know, can't get your mind in the right place to be like that, then I think that perception, that stereotype is pretty intimidating. I don't know if anyone's seen this film, Glengarry Glen Ross, but it's a brilliant film about sales that really satirizes the world of sales.
Gav, before we go there, I see Zinhle's got her hand up, and I think Nkaniso, you wanted to say something.
Sorry, I can't see their hands in my screen, so thanks.
No worries. Zinhle, do you want to go ahead? I've
Hi,
unmuted
guys.
you. Morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. No, I just wanted to also add, I think when you do sales, it takes a lot of your personality that needs to come across as well. So you actually need to be a believer in the product or the service that you're offering, and also be a person that is people orientated, because people buy people more than they buy products.
Yeah, great point. You guys are a lot more positive about it than I expected, which is a good.
Good
morning, everybody. Good morning, Coach.
Morning.
Morning, Kanyiso.
Good to see you.
My rabbi. That's my rabbi there. I call him my rabbi. My master teacher.
You've even gone for my haircut, I see.
Yeah. No, I was saying that, you know, I totally agree with everybody's views on sales, and nobody wants to be attached to the label salesperson or selling, or to come across as wanting to sell something or push a product to a person, because we have that innate fear about it. But I think everything hinges on sales. Without sales, you can't pay bills. You can't, no company exists without. So actually everybody is a salesman. It's just how do we sort of package that, or how do we approach it? But I think the psychology of it is what keeps people confined a lot of the times. But I think we, as startups, as entrepreneurs, it's so critical for us to understand that without sales, the whole business doesn't exist, because you need to get your product to the market that needs to compensate you and pay for it. So I think perhaps sometimes we can say we're trying to provide a solution, or we are benefiting the customer. But at the end of the day, I think at some stage, cognitively, at some stage, we have to, as entrepreneurs, actually embrace the term sales and embrace selling. Somehow internally internalize it, because without it, we cannot exist. That's my view.
For sure. Thanks, Kenny. So there's a great link to the next slide, actually, because I think that demystifying the term and not calling it sales and not thinking it in those terms is really important. And also building on what some of you have said, is that it isn't always about that kind of sales and that kind of way of operating, of being very aggressive and kind of overbearing and having to be kind of verbally persuasive. And I think whenever I've talked to my team, especially younger members of the team, about learning about how to do business development, we never use the word sales, and we always try and think of it, you know, as business development as a process in which lots of different people can play different roles, and in which you can find your own style of doing that's natural to you. And essentially it is about, as you were saying, can you say, you know, how to create a consistent flow of income. That's what it's about. And that involves many, many different tasks within it, which I'm going to try and break down for you. So I'm going to cover 5 areas. It's a lot of stuff to cover in a short space of time, so I'm going to fly through it fairly quickly, and some of it deserves a lot more discussion, but I'm just trying to unpack the elements that I think are most important in a pipeline process. So going to start off with you and your time, and how you as a leader of a business spend your time, and what you do with it that drives business development. Then talk a bit about, secondly, generating and closing leads, how, starting conversations, escalating them, and converting them to income. I'm going to touch very briefly on client and partner service, because I think something that maybe we don't think about so much in terms of generating income, but is critical. And then I hope you don't drop off for these last two sections, but we're going to talk about money and numbers. I was going to start with this, but I thought maybe we should leave it till later in the presentation. Probably the most important part of this conversation, and some of you might know this stuff, some of you might not. So we're gonna talk about that, and then finally something about setting and tracking targets. I'm happy to also just take questions as we go along, but we'll hopefully have a bit of time at the end as well if you want to save them up and you're not sure I'm going to cover something. So let's start off with you and your time. So one thing I have noticed quite a few times in working as a coach with other social entrepreneurs is people thinking about whether they should hire someone to do sales and fundraising, especially when they're quite small. And it makes sense because, it's so important. And sometimes you're doing so much as the leader of a business, you need to, you feel like you're not getting to it. But I'm very firmly of the opinion that, especially at an early stage in your business, you need to drive it yourself. And not only that, you are the best and most important person to drive it. And that's, some of you would I'm sure will know this, but it's because you have had the idea, you have the passion, as Demiso was saying, you carry the spirit and the energy of the company. And people who are going to invest money in you, they want to see you and they want to spend time with you and they want to be able to talk to you along the way. So I think it's super important that especially in the early stages of a company, that you make sure you realize that responsibility is yours. And that means that you have to think about the way you conduct your business and how you spend your time. Because the more time you can spend focusing on generating money, the more chance you have of being successful and generating revenue. So the first thing in terms of the time is, and this may be a very obvious point, but is to literally protect your time. And anyone who's worked with me as a coach will know that I have a kind of formula for the leader of a business, which suggests that you should be spending at minimum 40% of your time in the week on business development in some shape or form, as a minimum. And that's probably, for me, the amount of time you should be spending on it when things are going reasonably well and you're doing okay. Then in times of where you're really needing to generate money, and maybe you're struggling and your cash flow is running out, I would say maybe more like 80% of your time. And that can be a bit of a shock and a bit of a shocker to think about. And I've just shared with you what a kind of 80% of your time, week could look like based on my own calendar. It really takes a lot of sort of determination and dedication on your part to make that happen. And it's very hard because probably you're involved in product and operations and whatever else. But I think the first thing you can do to make sure that you're spending enough time is to block it out and to think about the different tasks that you need to do. So yes, you need to sit and think about leads and spend time, starting new conversations or generating them. But you probably also need time, quiet time to be writing proposals or writing pitches and things like that. And then obviously time for meetings and making sure that every week you are having business development meetings and you're making them happen and you're creating some pace, which we'll talk about a bit more. And then, you know, time to spend with current clients and people who might give you more money. So obvious point, but I think it's really important that you protect your time. If you're working in a team and you do have people working with you, you know, that it really forces you to think of how you can delegate other things that are not business development to other people. And I think there's a tendency for many people I've worked with, and I've seen it with myself, is sometimes easier to just revert to kind of focusing on the day-to-day rather than saying, well, I need to spend 3 hours generating leads, because it's quite hard. And I think it's not just, it's your time, but it's also your attitude and your energy. As I've said, minimum 40% up to 80% of your time as a leader. But your attitude to building a pipeline is also really important. One other thing I've really noticed is that many people overestimate the amount of opportunities they actually have. And that means that you can often end up falling a bit short on the amount of money you need to generate. And we'll touch on this at the end when we talk about processes you can use. But if you're tracking your opportunities properly, you will know whether you've got enough, and you can actually quantify them, whether you've got enough to sustain you, whether you've got enough to convert. And I think it helps to have a sort of attitude of cautious optimism or healthy pessimism. So, you know, not to have your head in the clouds about opportunities you have, because the reality is that some of them will not happen, you know, probably more than half. And so when it comes to developing opportunities, you have to sort of try and retain an attitude of having too much is not enough, that you need to consistently be creating new opportunities and consistently be escalating the ones you have. And then your energy, and this was raised in the little Q&A we did at the start, but the way you conduct yourself when you're doing business development, particularly if you're speaking to people or you're writing emails to people, is essential. And essentially, I think put this well, you know, you've got to be the one who communicates that passion. Because when you're meeting someone for the first time, or even with an intro email, or even in a funding proposal, that needs to get across. So it's something about being very self-aware when you're in this process, and at times also having to kind of have a bit of a game face on, because you know, you're not going to always be feeling that excitement and passion, and particularly if you're in a stressful place. But you know, if you've got one chance to get in a room with someone who is potentially going to give you money, then you've got to make sure you're the kind of person who communicates the passion and excitement you have, but then also knowing your value, you know, and having the confidence to be able to, you know, not go in and undersell yourself, I think is also super key. All right, any questions at this stage? I can't see hands, so Lindsay, you'll tell me if there are any hands, right? Okay, I'm going to skip on to generating and closing leads. So, as was also said, you guys are great because you've anticipated many of the things I wanted to cover. It is a bit like dating. So this is a little exchange I found when I was putting together this presentation. You know, like, I don't know about you, especially for the guys in this room who are generally the ones who use these kind of things, but I've never been able to use these pickup lines, these kind of cheesy pickup lines. because it's not me, you know. I would just sound like an idiot if I was coming out with a kind of cheesy pickup line to someone and think that that was going to lead to them wanting to go on a date with me. It just doesn't make sense to me. So we have to think really carefully about how we start conversations and what are the things that that people see in us, you know, and what are the ways that we can get across what we're excited about without having to come up with something cheesy or cliched or something that doesn't feel natural to ourselves. So I had to think about where the main leads that we've converted as Digify Africa have come from over the last few years, or maybe in the last year. And this is in no particular order, but it's something you think about when you think about your lead generation in particular. There's obviously at the top, you know, the kind of public awareness of what you do is super important. And I think a lot of people in this group will have found that, you know, funding leads come from that. And, you know, that's putting PR out there, as going to networking events and speaking to people directly, or even like giving talks or being on panels. And I've found that stuff, particularly the panels, etc., really, really great. You know, especially if you're on a panel with interesting people who could be funders. And often when I do these panels, I don't know, I just find, for me, the panel format really works in terms of being able to like get across what we do and why it's important. And usually a panel will be exactly on the topic you want to talk about in some shape or form. But you don't have to be passive about this stuff. You know, I think when you're thinking about how you spend your time, having a plan around your PR, your networking events you're going to, and your speaking opportunities, and actually setting yourself targets for them, is a really useful thing to do. So we track that on a monthly basis at Digify. We try and make sure we have at least 5 opportunities in each of these lined up for the month or the 2 months ahead. Obviously, there's direct approaches. We don't use this quite so much, but if in research we've kind of come across someone who we really need to speak to, like recently, for example, the MasterCard Foundation, we realized they've got this new strategy. It's right up the alley of Digify Africa. We need to speak to them. Now, it's really hard to approach people cold. It's much better to get a recommendation or to be introduced. But sometimes you have to revert to this. The way I prefer to do this actually is to like stalk someone on Twitter and send them a direct message, rather than, I'm not a big fan of LinkedIn messages, because there's a lot of spam there. But I think I should probably put this one at the bottom, because I think this is the method I prefer the least. And I'd rather try and find someone, if I need to speak to the MasterCard Foundation, I'd rather try and find someone who knows them and get an introduction that way. Marketing social media campaigns. This is also, I think it's important, but negligible in terms of direct conversion to leads. But it is part of the mix, you know, having yourself out there and being in the right spaces, talking about the right things publicly. You know, you might not see direct results from that, but it supports the overall effort. And then referrals from other funders. This maybe should have come at the top, because I found this one to be one of the most effective. And actually in 2016, when our company scaled very, very fast, a lot of it had come from getting recommendations from one funder to the other. And it's something that you can ask for. I mean, it might feel a bit weird, but a lot of funders do want to see you working with their sort of peers, and do want to see you scale, and don't want to be responsible for you, for funding you and being the sole provider of your funding. So if you haven't considered asking existing funders for referrals, I would think about it, especially if they're, you know, quite high profile and well connected, because you'll be surprised they might have 3 or 4 other really important people, especially if you're in a sort of pool of funders who are all concentrating on the same kind of thing, you know, and you know, if you're in education, for example, there's obviously a bunch of funders in South Africa and internationally who are focused on that, and they probably know each other because they go to the same events, and they sometimes collaborate. And then finally, and this is also, in fact, I've probably done this the wrong way around, because this is so important, and it's so obvious, but I think sometimes we ignore this one. But most of our business over the last few years has come from people we're already working with. And so having thoughts and strategies and a plan around how you, of course, take care of your clients and partners and funders, which we'll talk a little bit about in the next section, but also how you spot where's the next thing going to come from them, and you actually treat them like a new opportunity, even though they're already funding you or you're already working with them. So those are the five main things I think of in terms of lead generation. Just a few tips around this. We talk about starting conversations, lots of them, and I think I see business development as interesting conversations that lead to money. And to go back to the dating analogy, hopefully you don't on the first date, try and ask someone to marry you or make a big proposition. That would feel weird. And I think the same thing applies, unless you're in certain circumstances, to developing opportunities. You want to build them in a way that feels natural, and that they are a bit of a journey at times, especially big funders. But not to rush them, not to try and kind of go for the kill too soon. That's the approach I prefer, also because it feels more natural to me. Obviously, there will be times when you need to move fast and go for the kill earlier. Starting conversations is probably the easy bit. If you can find the right routes to the people you want to speak to and send them something cool and interesting. The harder bit is, I think, escalating those. My attitude to it is just to try and think about how you can be enthusiastic, full of ideas, how you can be at the top of someone's mind, how you can find out what they are worried about. So you're trying to find a match. All funders and clients obviously have priorities and things they're worrying about. If you can find out what those things are and kind of cross-reference them with what you do, then you'll find the match. I think sometimes there's a blindness from us as SEs because we want to put forward the thing we do and what we're good at. And that's great, but we also need to, try and think about, especially in an early stage, how you adapt that to someone's objectives. We've often talked about this thing of also meetings being important. And I mean, in the age of COVID, this one's a bit scrambled, of course, but I think that at one point in our past, we did an analysis of leads that we generated that converted to money. And we discovered that the vast majority of the times that we took a lead to a sale, it meant that we had at least 3 face-to-face meetings with someone. When we analyzed the kind of path between lead generation and sale. And I think that's, again, obvious but important, that sitting down with people face to face, especially if that person is going to decide to give you money, is really important. If you think about it from their perspective, which is something I'd encourage you to try and always do, you only want to open your checkbook to someone if you feel like you know them and you've seen them and you have spent time with them. So again, that speaks back to not going for the kill too early, but the importance of communication and contact with potential opportunities. And staying top of mind is, it's not about harassing someone and being overbearing and on their case all the time, but it is about gentle reminders and nudges, and not being shy about that either, because, most funders will expect that. And if you don't do that, you will just probably fall down their list. And it's not them being nasty or it doesn't mean anything. It just means that other voices are shouting louder. And then I think something that's also really important in this escalation stage is to identify budget. We'll talk in a minute about what we classify as warm or hot leads, but you need to know if this conversation is leading to budget. And sometimes we find ourselves in conversations where we don't know, maybe in the first conversation. And I'm sure you've all had experience of this. Some people they don't have money. They just want to partner with you, and that's really annoying. But it's best to find that out pretty early so you don't waste too much time and get too hopeful about someone funding you. And again, this is one I'd like to be cautious about, but if I can very gently at some point in the conversation, maybe identify something you see as a shared area of interest, and you can always just ask, is that something you guys have budget for? If you're not sure. I mean, hopefully it'll be obvious with some funders that you're coming for a funding conversation, or some clients that, you're coming for business. But if you're not sure, I think it's important to try and establish. And if they do, and they say yes, and the opportunity is clearly there, then the next challenge is to try and find out how much they have, which can be treated in the same way. If you identify an opportunity, you can just ask the question directly, and you don't have to do it in a very pushy and aggressive way. Kenisa, I can see your hand up.
Thanks. If you like, okay, so if you're still a bit early, so you're not really in Series A, B, or C, or whatever, seed level, and you are approached angels, how do you accurately evaluate your startup if you actually are at a level where you are past ideation and sort of working on your MVP or prototyping? How do you evaluate your equity if there's an angel that's interested?
You mean literally how you value your company?
Exactly, yeah.
I'm going to be honest and say I don't know. I don't have experience of that. I think you'd have to ask someone who had expert in going to angel investors. I've never dealt with them. I don't know if Ian Calvert, you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, look, it sort of goes back to the basics of what Gavin's talking about, because usually your valuation is based on a multiple of your revenue or your profit. So unless you've got revenue, as in sales, as in people are paying you to provide a service as opposed to investing in your business, then it's very difficult, unless you're, the next Uber or the next Facebook, to sell people on a business that hasn't made a cent yet. So to be able to talk to any form of investor, you've got a very clear, even if the money hasn't come in yet, you've got to have a good idea where that's coming from, and ideally some confirmed orders or whatever, depending on, some confirmed orders depending on whether your product is ready for market yet. So I think, what Gavin's talking about obviously is the day-to-day meat and drink of building a sustainable business rather than raising investment. But typically you value your business on a multiple of future earnings. So dependent on the category, there would be what they call PE ratios, which is profit to earnings ratios, and then you apply multiples to that. But obviously when if you haven't even sold one product yet, then it becomes hard to put a valuation on it. So I think, Gavin is obviously talking about income generation rather than investment generation. And just a couple of points I wanted to reinforce that Gavin's made, which is so important, is the listening. And I always say, you were given 2 ears and 1 mouth, and try and use them in that proportion. Because really it is about it's listening really hard, because of a lot of clients or partners, there's a difference between what they're saying and what they're really meaning. So you've got to really get underneath what it is that they're saying. And also, like Gavin says, you're trying to start a relationship with them. So if they're going to be a funder or even a client where it's a sort of a transactional relationship, you're going to have to spend time with them, and they're going to know, they will want to know that the person who they're going to have monthly status meetings with or have to go to conferences with or whatever actually cares about what they think and what they're saying. So it's a key part of any form of customer service or customer relationship to be really good at listening. And then just the second point to re-emphasize, the identifying the budget. I think at the gathering at the end of last year, I made the point that a quick no is worth a million maybes. And if you can get to the point where you've worked out that as much as this client seems nice and they like what you do and they're telling you lots of good things about your business, but they have no budget, then the sooner you can get to that point and politely move on, the better. And because you're all doing good social work, nobody will ever tell you that what you're doing is a crap idea. Everybody will tell you that they love what you're doing, but you've got to find, as Gavin said, very subtly at the right time. Yes, you love it, you love the idea, but is this something you would be prepared to spend money on? And if so, what? And there's different ways of coming at it. It's like, how do where is most of your budget allocated at the moment, or just that sort of. So it's in the sense of trying to understand their priorities as an organization, but within that, there's ways of finding out the key information that you need. Cool. There we go.
Oh, thanks, Ian. Yeah, obviously I've run a non-profit, so we've never gone for investment in Kenya, so that's a blind spot for me, unfortunately. But maybe there's someone else in the network who can advise you on that one. A few other tips is about maintaining pace in the process, and this is something that is kind of in your control, but sometimes you feel like it's not. And you will know, those of you who've dealt with big funders or big clients, it's not a quick process. In fact, often 6 months is the kind of, if it's a major kind of deal with a client or funder, in my experience, minimum 6 months, probably more like a year, probably, until you're going to be able to get money out of someone. So that's frustrating, but especially in the funding world, people have processes and they have, a lot of other people to deal with. What you can do is think about how you shrink some of the steps. So I've been conscious of this at times where we've really needed to generate stuff quickly. So when you go into a meeting with someone, your first meeting, at the end of that meeting, you set the next meeting and you try and set it for next week, rather than you end the meeting and say, we'll be in touch about the next meeting, because then you're probably going to end up meeting them in a month's time. It's little things like that you can try and be conscious of. Like following up quickly, I think is really important within a day or two after a meeting. Don't leave it for a week. I've said, don't be afraid to nudge. It's not about being pushy, but it is about setting pace in the process. And, if you can shrink what could end up being a 6-month conversation into a 4-month conversation, that could save your business. Being prepared, I think, is also super important, quite obvious, but go to meetings with an agenda, with a deck, and do your follow-ups, Sorry, I've got a malfunctioning toddler in the background. And make it easy for them. Really, you do have to put yourself in their shoes. But if you do get to the stage of where you think someone's going to sign something off, or you're at proposal stage, really make it easy. People don't want to read hundreds of pages of proposal. I think, getting to learn how to pull together a nice, sharp deck that's pretty brief and simple. If people want more detail, they'll ask for it. Some funders need a lot of detail, obviously, and a lot of written questions. That's fine. But I think make it short and easy to sign off. And if people want, especially with kind of clients and commercial clients, and if people want more detail, they'll ask for it. Just one note on I wanted to make. I'm not sure if I make this note later on, but with funders specifically, and I think one other mistake I see in early stage social entrepreneurs is being more reliant on the kind of funding where someone puts out a tender or a call for proposals and you submit your written application. I think it's very dangerous to rely on that type of funding because it's very competitive and it's much harder to kind of win, to be honest, than where you can kind of meet people and develop a relationship. However, if you do get those kind of opportunities or you spot a call for proposals, from a DG Murray Trust or someone like that, or a MasterCard Foundation, where we've had that experience, I would still try and make it my business to build a relationship with them on the side. And that's not like it's not like an unethical thing to do at all. It's just about maintaining some contact, letting them get to know you. You can use the kind of, you can use the idea that, well, I just want to find out more about your priorities and how you're thinking about these things. It doesn't need to be a sales pitch. But I really think that can help. If you can get to know the program managers, you can get them to know you before you or while you are submitting a formal, written proposal. Because to be honest, we don't even go for that kind of funding anymore. If we don't know someone, we don't have a conversation with them, it's very, very rare that we will submit a kind of response to that kind of request for proposals. Okay, I'm going to skip on to just client partner service. I'm going to fly through this, but obviously we all want happy customers like this beautiful man here. And I think just a couple of points on this, and I want to move on. But as Ian was saying, getting to know and understand them is key. One benchmark for me of whether I'm in a healthy place with someone is whether they would be happy to receive a WhatsApp from me out of hours, and I think if you can get them to that stage, then you're in a pretty good place, because it just makes it easier to deal with, shit going down or to actually line them up for a request for more money. So I try and get there with all our kind of major sort of clients or funders, and that involves building a relationship to a place where that they don't mind if you send them a little question at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and you're able to when the time is right, say, I've got this new idea, I'd love to chat to you about it, which can be the precursor to a new sale to someone. Also reading their documents and understanding the way they talk about the things that they're interested in, particularly for funders, is essential. Obviously, consistent comms and staying up to date on your reporting, your updates, but also like sharing interesting and cool stuff. And that's an easy way to stay top of mind. It doesn't need to be a newsletter, but it could just be, if you've got a new product launch, or you've had a nice bit of PR, or you're speaking at an interesting conference, you can just let them know, I'm doing this. Are you going to this conference? Because I'm speaking at it. Or did you see this in the press? We were pleased with this, etc. It's simple little things you can do that aren't trying too hard, but just keep yourself interesting and top of mind. And then I think it's really important with current clients and funders to be thinking of the what next, to have in mind, even if you've still got a year or more to run with them, what's next? What else can you get out of them? I mean, I know it sounds very mercenary, but this is the name of the game. What else could you be doing? What could you suggest? What else are they worrying about, or what else are they thinking about that you could tap into? What other problems can you solve for them on top of the one that you're getting funded for now? All right, I want to get into the numbers because I know time is pressing on. Now, apologies in this section if some of this is, known or very obvious to people, but I think if you don't know, then I would suggest you make it your business to know what gross profit means. Because when we talk about business development at Digify, we only use the currency of gross profit. We do not talk about, we very rarely talk about total revenue. So for those who don't know, I'm not gonna go into in great detail. That's something you should research on your own and try and make sure you understand. But I think there's a tendency in an early stage of a social enterprise to think about the total amounts of funding you're going for, rather than the gross profit. And the gross profit essentially is the total amount of funding minus what it's going to cost you to deliver that funding. So yeah, obvious thing for some people, but maybe not for others. But it can be very misleading to you if you're only thinking in total revenue and you're not thinking about and knowing exactly how much it's going to cost you to deliver something. So if you get 100,000 Rand for funding, but you're going to have to pay 50,000 Rand of that out to other people, to freelancers, or on travel and expenses, you're not getting 100,000, you're getting 50,000 for your business. And that is the amount that's going to go against your general overheads. So I really think it's essential that you understand this principle, even if you have a good finance person alongside you. And I would encourage you to think about your business development in terms of gross profit rather than total revenue. Understanding it, a basic income statement is going to be key if you want to get into understanding how much money you need to survive. I mean, this will not tell you about your cash flow, how much money you have in the bank, but it will, if you understand this and how your business development feeds into your income statement, it will help you make a surplus or a profit. And that is what we're trying to do. I think that's another important point. Even if we are a non-profit, and even if we're largely funded by funders who don't want you to make a profit, we're still trying to make a surplus. Whether you're a for-profit and you call it a profit, and it's something you can pay out to yourself, whether you're a non-profit and it's about a surplus, we all need to be aiming to make a surplus. If we're a non-profit, we want that surplus to go into our reserves for a rainy day, or to invest in something, or to, pay out to our beneficiaries. So we shouldn't be scared of talking about, net profit, and understanding how much revenue and how much gross profit you need to generate to convert to a net profit or a net surplus. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but if you don't really understand those things, I would really recommend you make it your business to do so. One part of this that is really important is how you price yourselves. It's a really difficult one, but we need to have some kind of pricing model that is going to help us make a surplus. For people who are dealing with products, this might be a bit more straightforward with you in terms of how you cost the production and you add your margin. But for those of us working with a more service business, where it's about our hours and our time, or it's a big project with lots of moving parts, getting the pricing right is essential. And again, quite a contentious one at times in the non-profit world, for those of you who are operating there. But my philosophy on this in the non-profit world is that we still use a model that's not unlike a kind of what an agency or a consultancy would do, is that we have everyone in the team has an hourly rate, and that hourly rate is based on their cost to company plus a margin. And that's really the main way that we generate a surplus, is by making a margin on our hours. And it's something that's I would say 90% of the time I've used in funding bids, and unless a funder has a particular way of doing it, which they'll tell you about, I would look at doing it that way. Again, you know, it's a topic we could go into in some detail, but we don't really have the time today. And there's lots of information out there about pricing models, but it's super important because you could end up, you know, like winning work and doing really well in business development. But if your pricing's wrong, you end up losing money. And there's been times in my career where I've realized that our pricing isn't wrong and we have been losing money even though we've been winning business. General advice on the numbers: don't hide from them. I think it's a real tendency for us, especially social entrepreneurs who don't see themselves as business people, have no formal training, haven't studied finance, which describes me. You know, have no formal business training. Everything I have learned on the fly by doing and making mistakes and learning. But I wish that I had learned this quicker. I wish I'd learned about how a cash flow works and what gross profit and net profit, how they're calculated. I wish I'd learned that earlier, because they're probably the most important things that I've learned in this sense. So I think you have to know, or even if you can't really grasp the detail, you have to have someone who can grasp it for you. But I think as the person leading the business, if you don't understand your bottom line and your targets and where your finances are now, then the rest of it is kind of, you're flying blind. How do you know how to spend your time? How do you know which opportunities you should be focusing on? You know, so everything does really stem from the numbers. I've touched on this before, but I think when it comes to numbers, you have to be healthily paranoid. If your target for the year is 100,000 and you've got 100,000, a really great chance of 100,000 Rand coming from one funder, that's not good enough. You know, you need to be paranoid about that. There's a possibility it won't come through or something else will happen, you know. So it's about what I touched on earlier, always thinking that too much is not enough when it comes to opportunities, and not overestimating or thinking that because you've got something lined up that it's going to come in until you've actually signed the contract. But then once you have signed a contract and got something in, it's about making sure you're managing your own expectations about when it comes in, because usually it doesn't come in when you want to. And some people in this group have really suffered from that. You know, things can come in a year later than they're meant to. So, you know, especially with big funders or government funders, thinking that because you're meant to be closing this in June, that you'll have the money at the end of June, you're probably not being healthily paranoid enough. You need to build in buffer, and a lot of buffer, and deal with worst case scenarios is probably the best way you can handle that one in terms of estimating money coming in. If you don't understand finance, this is the third point, I really believe you should either make it your business to learn, or you should invest, even if you haven't got much money, invest some in someone who's going to help you put together a good cash flow and help you manage all of this stuff. I think there's a tendency to try and cut corners when money is a bit tight and just go for a bookkeeper or someone who might know. But I think getting a good finance brain involved in your business as early as possible is essential. Okay, final section, setting and tracking targets. So this slightly intimidating document is an example of what our pipeline looks like, which I've shared with, this is not a real pipeline, it's a dummy. It's got dummy figures in, so don't think that this is the current state of my business. But it's just intended to help you try and understand how we think about it. I think having a system based on numbers for your business development is really key. Again, it goes back to understanding how you spend your time, what you're focusing on, how well you're doing. You know, if you don't know that, you are literally flying blind. I'm not suggesting you need something as complicated as this, but let me just quickly try and tell you the principles around this. Can you see my cursor moving? Yeah. So it all starts with having a target, of course. And here is a dummy target. So let's say the target for this business and it's a gross profit target is R1 million. So that's worked out. First of all, working that out in the first place is important because it should be enough to cover your overheads for the year, your running costs, and make you some kind of surplus. Ordinarily, we would set it at our overheads plus 15 to 20% on top. And if we can do that in a year, then, you know, we'd be fairly happy. And then it's about having a calculation of how well you're doing. How far are you towards that? You can also have in your mind, of course, what your break even is. So knowing just what you need to get through the year. But I think knowing where you're at is essential. I've mocked this up to be sort of current. So if you're imagining this is where this business is today, you know, there's a calculation in my pipeline that will show me my percentage towards that target at any given point in the year. So if this was now and this were the real figures, I would be at 56% of my target. So I'd be feeling okay. You know, I'd feel more comfortable if I was at 70, because it's obviously better to get things secured before the end of the year, before you get into the second half of the year. Ideally, you'd be at 100 or more, of course. And that's the dream. I have known one or two Amapico / further entrepreneurs who've been in that position, but it's quite rare. But just having a system where you know, and that does really rely on your finance resource, how much you secured against what you need for the year is the first thing. And then, you know, I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't have the time, but what we also have is a layout of what we do have contracted. So different clients, how much income per month, which we break down from the total for the year across the months of which we're delivering the work. But then crucially, I think, you know, there's our hot income and our warm income. And this is our guide to what we have in the pipeline. So hot income, we rate that on the basis of, we think it's 50% or more likely to come in. And that's a value judgment you have to make yourself or as a team. But also, crucial point, non-negotiable, you have to have submitted a costing. Like, this can't be something that you think is 50% likely, but you haven't submitted a budget yet. I mean, I'm talking about the way we rate it. So that's how we assess hot gross profit. Warm to us is where we've definitely identified that there is budget, but currently we're thinking of it as 0 to 50% likely. So by rating our opportunities there, we can give ourselves a, you know, value of currently what's in our total hot or warm income. And then you can compare that against, you know, obviously how you're doing for the year. So if our target is 1 million, we've currently got, we've signed contracts for 560,000, means our gap currently is 440. In my hot income, I've got 725. So that's pretty good because I've got enough to cover my gap. But then the crucial thing about this really is about how much of your hot income you end up converting into contracted income. And based on my own experience, it's generally much less than 50%. Sometimes it's been, you know, from year to year, it can waver. Sometimes it's maybe 50% of what I have in my hot I would expect to close. Sometimes it can be less, more like 20, 30% in a year. It's something you'll need to learn. for your own about in terms of the kind of opportunities you create. But again, it's really important to know where you're at, because if I'm sitting now with May about to end and I've got this figure in mind, 725 in my hot opportunities, I'd be thinking I'm doing okay, but I definitely need to be generating more opportunities. It's not enough to convert to sustain me unless I'm really lucky, and you don't want to be relying on luck. I hope this is all making sense. I know I'm going through it quite quickly. Warm really should be probably at least 5, if not 10 times the amount of your gap. That's a lot. And we're always underperforming in terms of the amount of warm income we've got. But I think being worried about that is a good thing, because it constantly makes you think, well, I need to get more stuff in this warm income. And that means turning things that are just conversations or opportunities into something where you've identified a budget. So with every opportunity or conversation you have, you're classifying it, you're putting it into some kind of bracket, and you're escalating it until hopefully it gets in here and contributes towards your ultimate target. Hope that's making sense. I'm happy for you to screenshot this and use it, if it's useful. I can also share this as a spreadsheet if it's helpful to anyone with all the formulas. What we also do is we have a tracking system. 2 months ago, this was a physical whiteboard, but in the age of COVID, it's been converted to a digital whiteboard. And this is something me and my team, I mean, I know not all of you have teams to go through this stuff with, but even if you don't, I would still consider having some kind of informal tracking, which is what this is. This is something that sits behind our pipeline, which is a spreadsheet. And this is what we talk about from week to week. I won't go through it all, but just to sort of flag that this is where we kind of flag our sort of current conversations, things that are not yet hot or warm, but it does also include current clients who, for example, this is a Facebook opportunity, who we want to upsell or on-sell something to. So every kind of opportunity we think we're going to try and get into hot or warm, we have that flagged and we're talking about it. But we also have, we also talk about, we also have just a summary of what's in our hot and warm as well. We flag up kind of what we've won, our latest wins. And then we have a section for upcoming PR and upcoming events, and then just a summary of our targets. And so that kind of just, we also talk about partnerships that are not financial, but could convert to something financial potentially. Just gives you a sense of like the things you could be just tracking from week to week. And especially if you have a team, this is really useful. Then finally, I just wanted to talk a bit about elephants, rhinos, cheetahs, and turkeys. Now this is this is something that is just a useful way to think about the type of opportunities you've got. It's something I stole from someone else. I can't claim credit for this, I'm afraid, but I've used it and passed it on to many people. And it's about thinking the different kinds of opportunities you have and when they're useful and what you should be spending your time on. So briefly, an elephant is a big opportunity that stays with you for a long time. So it could be a 3-year, deal for a lot of money, something that will be more than 50% of your target for the year for 3 years, let's say. A rhino, it's a big opportunity, but one that's probably a once-off or quite short-term. So a lot of money, maybe for 6 months, something that would make a big dent in your target, but it's over and done with in 6 months. A cheetah is a small opportunity, but something that will be repetitive. So say a small deal, regular income, monthly income, but for maybe a year or two. Turkeys, small deal, once off. So those little opportunities that come in, low budgets, where you think, should I do this or should I not? but often we end up doing them because we want to get the money in and we think they'll be quick. Why I found this useful to think about and why we use it as a conversation piece is you need these different things at different times. Obviously, we all want the elephants, because if we have 2 or 3 elephants, then we're probably sorted for the next couple of years. But these are the hardest things to get, and they take the longest. And so, you know, you need to put a lot of time and resource into getting an elephant. Whereas the turkeys, you know, if you're facing a small gap and you've got a short-term cash flow, you might want to think about a quick win, something you can develop and close quickly. And something that would just tide you over, you know. Cheetahs are useful because they could cover your, you know, a bit of your overheads, and just be a kind of a nice little bottom line for you. But we use this as a sort of, I hope that makes sense. We just use this as a way of, at times where we're not sure how to spend our time, you know, and it builds into kind of the importance of maybe having a reflection time or analysis of thinking, where are we spending our energy? Are we spending our energy just chasing these things that are quick wins? And I've seen this again and again and again. You know, the little bits of business that you think are close, but actually maybe you're spending too much time chasing these things. Are you spending enough time? Are you planning enough time on bringing in an elephant? Because they require a lot of your time and resource. So if it's useful, you know, it can be a fun way to think about classifying your opportunities, and particularly in terms of how you are spending your time and resource and whether it's in the right places. Oh yeah, I did put some ratings on them. Cool. Okay, some final thoughts. Tracking opportunities, whatever system makes sense, essential. Otherwise, you don't know where you are, and helps you face the reality, which I think is important. Helps you make sure your head is not in the sand about the state of your business. If it creates panic in you, then that's probably necessary, because it probably means you're running out of money, and you can't let that happen. So you need to feel the fear, and so facing reality is essential. Letting the numbers guide your focus, the elephants, etc., because it will change how you spend your time. If you're doing well for the rest of the year, but you're going to run out of money next month, then you need to be thinking about turkeys, probably. But you know, if you're facing if you're really starting your year and you know, you've got a lot of money to bring in, you need to be thinking about elephants. Reflecting and learning. I think this is really important. We try and quarterly look at how we've done in BizDev for the last 3 months. What's worked, what hasn't, what things are we focusing on, where are we doing well, where are we not? And that helps us, again, just refine how much time we're spending on everything. And then my last thing is, and going back to the open, it is about being yourself. You know, and I've spoken to many of the SEs I coach. You don't have to be a salesperson. You really should not try and be someone you're not in this process. It's possible, and I discovered this in my career quite late, because I spent a long time when I was in the UK not having to do business development and sales, and relying on the people leading the Liberty, the company, to do it. And it didn't come naturally to me at all. You know, I never felt like, you know, I'm that person who can walk into a bar and just drop a chat up line on someone. You know, I had to find my own way of doing it. And I discovered that the more I was myself, the better I was at it, because I discovered that people find me easy to trust, you know, and they find me reassuring, and I can come up with ideas, you know, and so I leveraged those things. It meant that I didn't have to go into meetings and be jazz hands with people, you know. I could build trust. I could get someone interested and excited about what I did because I'm really passionate about it. But that doesn't mean I had to be a kind of, you know, showman in meetings, or it's not necessarily that I didn't have to step out of my comfort zone, because I have had to a lot. but I've had to find my own kind of business development voice, which I feel confident. And it's even better if you can build process around that. So you understand, you know, how to sell yourself in the best possible way, but you also have a system behind it that makes sure you do the right things from day to day and month to month. And that, my friends, is the end of my presentation.
Excellent, thank you.
How long
Thank
we have
you,
left?
Gavin.
Not long.
We do have a few minutes left, and I'm sure there are a couple of questions. I also just wanted to say recap on a couple of things. I love the let the numbers guide your focus. I think that's really, really incredible. And I know numbers are intimidating, but I do think it's critical to get comfortable with the numbers and the facts and reality, really. You're healthily paranoid about the numbers. It's also great. I've just sent a link to a folder on the G Drive for the guys with a couple of financial templates, you know, cash flow, balance sheets, income statements. I sent it to you guys in August last year, so I've just reshared it with you should you need some backup on that front. But yeah, let's open the floor for some questions. Anybody have a question for Gavin? You feel free to unmute yourself, which is the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Anybody?
I have one.
Wonderful, go for it.
Gavin, how do you know when it's like you're at that stage in your relationship with your client when you can comfortably ask and get an understanding of the budget? Yeah.
Well, I mean, as Ian mentioned as well, I would be trying to do it pretty early on. You know, it's a bit of a risk to sort of build a relationship really far and to not have a clue whether it's leading to money. It's not necessarily a risk, but you could be wasting a lot of time, you know, and putting your energy into developing a relationship without, you know, with it kind of leading nowhere. So yeah, I mean, I would just be thinking about how to work it into the conversation somehow pretty early on.
Because so often I feel like we get asked to prepare like, you know, cost proposals and apply for things and it feels like we've got no idea of the budget. And then it's so risky.
The actual amount, the amount.
Yeah.
So do you ask, what available budget do you have for this? Can you give us a guide on what your budget allocation is for this? I mean, that's what I would try. You know, I would say probably more than 50% of the time, they probably won't give it to you. You know, more often than not, I would say they're probably operating on the principle that you'll come in lower than they're hoping for. You know, and so it'll be a bit of a win for them. But it's definitely worth asking that question. Do you have a set allocation for this? Because that will help us. That will help guide how we put together this proposal. That's the way I would phrase it. Yeah. You know, and then it's not an unreasonable thing to ask. And if they say no, then you're just like, okay, well then we'll cost this as we see fit.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge always is, you know, what's ridiculously expensive for a turkey is incredibly cheap for an elephant. If you know what I mean. And so, you know, you've got to have a basic idea. And like Gavin says, if it's all based on your gross profit, so you know what this piece of work that they've asked you to do, you know what it's going to cost you. Yeah. And you know what the cost of goods is, so what extra freelancers or direct costs are going to be related to that. Then you work out how much of your time or your staff's time it's going to take. And then the only thing you've got to play with then is your own margin, your own expectation, so your gross margin. And again, depending on how bullish you are, or if it's a huge project, then you can afford to make a lower gross margin. But if it's a turkey, then you need to make a good gross margin. Else, why are you doing it in the first place?
Yeah.
So it's always just getting a feel for the client. Obviously, large foundations or large corporates, as I say, typically they're more tolerant of bigger numbers. But as Gavin says, there is no shame in asking them. And they should respect you for asking them, because otherwise it's like, would I want to do business with somebody who's guessing the whole time?
Yeah, and just building on that, also being able to say no, that is important. And we don't always, and we can't always do it, because sometimes we just need to get the business, even if potentially it's not profitable. And I know I've done that many times in the past. I don't do it anymore. Like now it's non-negotiable. It's got to be worth it. The only time you would do it is if it's like going to be a fame job for you, or it's going to be really fun. If you can qualify it as fun or fame, then maybe it's worth doing it, even if it's just breaking even. But otherwise, like there's a real power in getting to a place where you say no because, they've got 100, you need 200 at minimum.
Yeah, or if you think that it's a way of getting somebody else to pay for a prototype. I mean, we're doing a program at the moment for a really small paying client, and Further is not going to make a cent on it. And we're spending everything that they're paying is we're spending on delivering the project. But once we've delivered it, we'll have a new product to sell. We've got a nice prototype of a process and a learning journey that we can then sell to somebody else. So it's worth us doing it. So it's basically, you've just got to see it almost as an R&D budget. And then, as Gavin said, you can use that then to pitch it to people, and you've learned the mistakes, and you can now start to sell it at a profit or a surplus.
Yeah, I think it's the most important thing is that you're conscious about what you're doing,
exactly,
and the type of opportunities. And if you're saying yes, you know why you're saying yes, and if you're saying no, you know why as well. Because I think we just get stuck in the hamster wheel of just running towards every opportunity as fast as we can, and without being the coach of the football team, observing what's going on the pitch, rather than being the centre forward trying to score.
Dear Danae has a question.
Thank you, Gavin. This was really an eye-opener. So much to learn. I have several questions, not one, but I'm just going to try to ask two. The first one is very short. How long can you take? What is the reasonable time to nudge a contact, a potential donor, for example? And the second one, how do you deal with donors who don't pay salaries? They want you to work, but you don't get anything out of it.
Yeah, so on the first question, I mean, like I say, I would not be shy about nudging people, even if it's weekly or every other week. But finding a reason to do it, I think it's much easier if you can sort of nudge them subtly or almost passive aggressively at times, by sending them something or asking them a question. It's just about keeping yourself top of mind. I know this is such a frustrating part of what we do, is waiting for people to respond and give answers. But I would urge you to be bolder than might feel comfortable, because if it's someone whose job is to give money, they'll be used to it, and as long as you do it in a nice way, then there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with doing it more frequently than you might be comfortable with. The second question, yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were just talking about. I mean, with a funder, for me these days, like we just did something with European funding in the last couple of years, where, they're very, very tight on basically they don't allow you to make a margin or surplus on the funding. If you go into it, you have to go into it knowing that it's not going to help you reach your surplus. There's got to be another reason, like we were just discussing, that you do it. Either you're going to learn something, or it's going to make you famous, or it's going to help you develop something that's going to help your business in some other way. But this is just about being conscious of it. But I would be very wary of doing it with a big funder where you're going to be reliant on that money, because, you know, even though you might be getting a big disbursement from that funder, that money is all going to go out of your bank account again at some point. So it might be great when you receive the money and suddenly your bank balance is looking healthy, but in 6 months' time, you're going to be running out of cash, unless you have other more profitable opportunities in your pipeline.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Mzo or Bassa?
Okay.
Sure,
Hi, Gavin.
Hi, Mzo.
Yes, how are you doing, Gavin?
Good. How are you, sir?
I'm all right. I've just got one question for you. I get the animal analogy where there's an elephant and rhinos and stuff like that, but can it ever be where, as a small business or a small SE, you are faced with an elephant, but your business has no way of dissecting that elephant, or actually standing up to the opportunity of an elephant size, but you are faced with it there and then? How does one navigate around that?
So opportunities that might be too big for you to deliver on, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the reverse of the question we were just discussing, isn't it? Of like, if something is not profitable, something that could be profitable, but
Yes.
you're likely to not be able to deliver on. I mean, it's a great problem to have, but it could also completely destroy your business. Because I think I've experienced that, you know, of ending up with an elephant that turned out to be 10 times larger than we realized, becoming very reliant on that money, because I was constantly also stretching our company to try and meet targets. That was the reason that I almost went out of business with Digify. So I think you have to be very, very careful and cautious about that if you don't think you're going to be able to deliver. And it's so tempting, especially if we're talking big amounts of money, to go into it and think everything will be all right and everything will work itself out. And sometimes it might, you know, sometimes it could. And if you really are good at operations and delivery, you could find a way to pull it off. But I think if you're going into a big deal uncertain you're gonna be able to deliver, you're really playing with fire, and not just about, you know, messing up, but literally about destroying your whole company. I hope that that's not too doom laden, but you know, it's been something that has been a major challenge for me, and especially in our approach to scale. You know, I think it's better to scale in a manageable way than in a very, very optimistic and overly ambitious way where you hope you can find ways to deliver rather than you've got it worked out. The latter is the place you want to be, believe me. It's more stressful being in that situation. I found it more stressful being in a situation where I couldn't deliver than I did having no money and running out of money.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to say in my previous business, there's only one thing worse than having no clients, and that's having one client.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the concentration risk, as it's called, you know, of being too reliant on one elephant, and it's a massive risk. You know, we took that risk with a big tech company, and got dropped by them unceremoniously, because if you're reliant, if more than 40% of your income is reliant on one source, that's a risk, in my opinion. I'm still in that situation with my business now. I'm still living with that risk because I do have one funder who's more than 40%. But, you know, we're consciously trying to change that. And again, that being conscious about that informs how we go about our business now of trying to find one or two other elephants, which is our major focus.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin.
Sure. Basso, surely you know everything. You don't need to answer questions.
You never know. You never know. So I actually like your analogy of the girlfriend and how to get a girlfriend. It actually makes sense at last. What is the pipeline like? But now I wanna ask you something like, you've
Don't
said
ask me how to get a girlfriend. I've forgotten.
Sure, Bragi. You have said that you shared the methodology of a pipeline to a lot of us SEs and other people. But I want to understand, like, what kind of mindset should an entrepreneur to be able to execute a successful pipeline? Because I think there is more to the mindset that is quite required for a simple or a basic thing such as a pipeline to be successfully executed.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've touched on a few of these things, but, you know, it's about having this kind of sort of never-ending hunger, for one thing, you know, of like I said a couple of times, too much is not enough. You know, you've got to have that attitude of keep on filling the pipeline. I mean, you can, you know, there's nothing wrong with overstuffing your pipeline. I think overstuffing your contracted work is a risk, as we were just discussing. But what a great position! What the best position is to be saying to people, well, you know, you can't work with them now because you've got too much business. You know, if you get to that state, then you're in a very, very healthy place. You might not want to say no to them, but I hope you take the point. So having that mindset of always stuffing that pipeline with new opportunities. And then I think the mindset of seeing it as starting conversations and building lots of relationships, you know, as the leader of the business, that's what I found most helpful. And an easy way to sort of think about things, and going back to the girlfriend or boyfriend analogy, you know, you're just wanting to go on dates with lots of people, and you're wanting to kind of start fun conversations with lots of people, because only 10% of them will end up being fruitful, you know? So, yeah. And then, you know, approaching it with a very sort of positive mindset. Again, sounds obvious, but, you know, like thinking of ideas and things you can suggest, and positive energy you can bring to your emails and your meetings with people. You know, if you can get yourself into that frame of mind for the way you start your conversations and develop them, and being efficient and responsive and communicative, you know, those are all things that are within your control as an SE, as a leader of a business, that can help like escalate opportunities much quicker. Is that what you're getting at with the question? Basso? If you're still there.
Oh yeah, no, I'm still here. No, I think it makes sense. Thanks, Baji.
Sure. We'll talk about it more next week.
Sure.
Lindsay, you're on mute.
Tulani has a question.
Morning, G.
Morning.
Yeah, man, a quick one. Perhaps it should be a good thing. I don't know. When you have an instance where on the main, in terms of your opportunity, you are playing more in the elephants and rhinos space, should it worry you or should it excite you? And if it worries you, is it necessarily a bad thing because they tend to take time to convert? And if it excites you, would it then be a good thing because perhaps for an medium term, an extended period of time, you will not have necessarily many pressures. How then do you concentrate on delivering on those whilst also building on the smaller animals, the cheetahs and the turkeys, so that should there be a chink in your, or a glitch in your wave, you're able to be sustainable in those times where there are issues with your elephant and your rhino?
Yeah, great question. I mean, one of the biggest mistakes you can make is to stop. If you say you landed a couple of elephants, is to stop thinking about elephants, if that makes sense, you know, or at least not, if you do, not for long. And I think it's an easy trap to fall into. Like I say, if you've got a couple of really big clients or funders that are going to last you a year or two, then you're like, sorted, you know, that's my majority of my income taken care of. That can be really dangerous, because if you take your foot off the pedal of what happens next, and bearing in mind that bringing an elephant in could take you, as you know, years, then even if your elephant is going to last you for 2 years, what next? You know, what's going to come after that? And if you're getting a good level of funding and you're employing people, you know, and you've got millions of money to play with, then you get to the end of that 2 years, you're facing a cliff. So you need to have the next elephant lined up. And that's where, you know, so there's two things. One is, don't take your foot off the pedal in terms of business development, or if you have to, then try and make sure it's for a fixed time, you know. And for you, I think pertinent question now, because you're going to go into delivery, but you need to try and make sure you don't get stuck in delivery, you know, and that you're thinking about that 40% of your time on business development coming back as soon as you can, even if you need to be focused on delivery now. And then the other thing is about having diversity in your revenue streams. You know, I've never really achieved this because I've also been mainly reliant on elephants and rhinos. But my business would be much healthier if I had a few more cheetahs, you know. I don't really need the turkeys these days so much, maybe now and then. But I wish I had a couple of cheetahs, because, you know, it's just a baseline. It's just like a retainer income. And actually, I think an ideal situation would be if that covered my overheads, if that covered all my overheads, and then the funding was on top, was like the nice to have. That, I think that's the healthier business model. I haven't achieved it yet, but, you know, if you can generate that ongoing monthly revenue somehow, and then you're funding, you're not reliant on it. I think the reason why is because of the timelines of funding, you know. It just creates risk. It's not just that an elephant can, you know, decide they're going to leave you and leave you with a huge overheads bill, but it's also that they're unreliable, you know. As you know, you're expecting a big payment that's going to keep your business sustained, and then it gets delayed for 3 months or 6 months or a year. So that's why having just elephants and rhinos is risky. It's risky for your cash flow. And so balancing it with regular income coming in other ways makes for a healthier mix of revenue.
Okay, noted. Thanks.
Sure.
Some good questions. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Anyone else before we sign off? Just yes. Anyone else? Tulani, sorry, you did I cut you off there?
No, I wanted to come in. I don't know if it's safe to do that.
Say again?
No, can I come in maybe with a question directed to Ian, if he's still there? Ian Malum Ian.
Yes.
Yeah. In terms of sales, and maybe tying that with the animal analogy, when you concentrating on bringing in and having these elephants in the room and some rhino, you tend to be at the forefront, and then there is the aspect again of the cheetah and the turkeys that you, as Gavin has said, it's risky not to have them. Now, time and again during delivery, you might want to build sales teams, and some of your leads may flow from the work you're doing with the elephants. What I've experienced in trying to do so, I've found that if a team member and not myself is trying to push the sales agenda, so to speak, on trying to bring in the cheaters and so forth, people tend not to want to listen to team members because they've dealt with you before when you were tackling the elephants and the rhinos. How do you, if it's possible, and if the question is a fair one, how do you transfer that confidence that your potential clients that you've dealt with have to your sales team that is not yourself? And you create the space, but the interaction is with your people, not yourself. Yet you find that the people that they are attending to, or they are trying to put together deals with, we're expecting to see you, or are much more comfortable in dealing with you. So how do you create comfort and support or cushion for your people when they're being dealt with, when they're dealing with other clients?
Such a good question. And one that so many startup businesses, particularly service-oriented businesses. So many years ago, I started an advertising agency with two other partners, and we put on, like you typically do, you put your names on the door. So it was Bull, Calvert, Pace. And obviously all your clients just want to deal with Bull, Calvert, or Pace, not the business. And everybody, you start a business and you promise them that you're going to get the personalized attention of the founder. But then, as you say, you get a few elephants and you don't have time to go and have meetings with the cheetahs or the turkeys. I think, I mean, there's no key solution. The first thing is to employ really good people, so that you might go to a first meeting, but you give that other person sufficient space in the meeting. If it's a younger, talented, hungrier kind of salesperson, you give them space and you demonstrate in the meeting to the client that they have your full trust and backing and support, and that you're not correcting and you're not talking over them. And it's challenging. So the first thing is find the good people, demonstrate your trust in them to the potential client, and then make sure that I mean, it's sort of tactics, but when that young junior salesperson is taking over the conversation, just make sure that you're CC'd on everything so that the client knows that you're still involved. Obviously, if there are important meetings, then you will make the time to be there. As long as the client feels that you're present in the discussion somehow, even if they're not seeing you the whole time. So it's, and every client is slightly different, but if clients only want to deal with you and you perpetuate that relationship by not empowering the people who are working with you, then you're going to perpetuate your own problem. So find good people, demonstrate trust to them in front of the client, and then just stay involved so that the client knows that you're giving input behind the scenes.
Okay. All right. Thanks, man.
Just to add one thought to that, I think, because I'm actually experiencing this at the moment, trying to train up some junior biz dev people, is just trying to spend a lot of time coaching them as well, and feeding back and I'm doing like monthly coaching sessions with them at least, where I can try and help them think through, you know, tough meetings they've had, or, you know, and giving them lots of feedback and attention on proposals they write and things like that. But yeah, I've definitely made that mistake that Ian mentioned, of like going into a meeting with a junior person and like not letting them speak, because I'm so used to pitching and doing the talking, you know, it just comes out of my brain without me even thinking. But for them, that's a real confidence crusher, you know. And one of my team actually got a bit upset about that. So that was a good realization for me of what Ian was saying. Give them the chance to lead meetings, and yeah, it can be very empowering.
I think also maybe just to build on that point, I think it's important when you're positioning yourself and your team with your clients, it's almost up to you as the leader to paint that picture so that they can understand where this other development person fits in the team, so that they can really be reassured that they are well positioned to serve every need of the client. You know, I think it's again about that reassurance, making sure that the client knows that they will be fully serviced by this person and where they fit into the business and how important they are to the actual business. So it's almost like not only reassuring client, but also the team member of their place in the business. And just, again, the client needs to know that they are a valued team member, because, you know, that's why they're going to be dealing with the client, you know. So I think that's important.
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say, I mean, it's a little thing, but it was something that I always stress, that when you talk in a conversation, you talk we and not I. So you talk as the business. So, you know, this is the way we work. We think that, we do this. You know, one of my my ex-business partners, we used to call him the optometrist, because he was an eye specialist. It was always, I think this and I think that, and I would do it this way. And if you just say we, and they know that they're dealing, for you, they're dealing with finishes of nature, not with just Tulani and what Tulani. And it's a very small little thing, but it makes a world of difference.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, if you can combine all of that with this kind of light touch client service, you know, if you've got them on WhatsApp and you can, you know, let them know you're there, but also be clear about the fact that it's about knowing when to insert yourself, you know, at the right moment, but when also to say, and, you know, my colleague X is going to follow up and make that happen. You know, not taking all the actions yourself from meetings, and which is also another tempting thing to do if you know you can get it all done.
No, thank you very much.
Awesome. Super. I think that
that was brilliant. Well done.
Yeah, that wraps up the session. It was super, Gavin. I think we're all going to be using rhinos, elephants, turkeys, and cheetahs going forward. Really, really awesome information. We have recorded the session, guys, so you would be able to revisit some of the really awesome talking points. I really hope this has given you not only insights into how to build a strategy, but some really, really practical, logical tools. And I think, yeah, it's all, you know, it always stems back to you being able to tell your story and then really, you know, believe, share in the passion. So yeah, thank you for reiterating that, Gavin. I think we all know there are quite a few components to business development. But we also really want to just reiterate, guys, that it is, you know, when you have questions, you've got this group to lean on. You've got us, you've got your coaches. It is a journey, business development. It's a huge part of what you guys will do and continue to do. So reach out and ask the questions and scenario play with your peers. You've got an amazing network of people around you to really leverage off. And so, yeah, Thanks again, Gavin, and we'll be in touch, guys, with when that recording is released. I've also shared those templates with you to help support on the journey. So yeah, thanks so much for your time, everybody, and have a good weekend, and we'll chat soon. The next masterclass will be in 2 weeks' time, so watch the WhatsApp group. I'll share all the deets with you.
Thanks so much, Gavin and team.
Good luck.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.